Hello, everyone. This is Ned Desmond from SOSV. It's my pleasure today to introduce this remarkable session on sustainability and climate in India, led by my excellent colleague Parikshit Sharma at the IndieBio program in San Francisco. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Parikshit.
Thank you, Ned. And hello, everyone. I appreciate you all taking the time and joining. And many thanks to my co-panelists today for making the time. I will introduce you guys individually, but before we go there, to start us off, look, there's no net zero without India. 1.4 billion people live here. Consumption is rising. India wants to become a manufacturing superpower in the world. And on the other hand, there's this 2070 net zero target, right? So this balancing act of economic growth versus sustainability has been in the discourse for so long. So today I want to kick it off with hearing from each one of you, both on a personal level and as your firm's thesis. Why climate? Why work in climate? Why devote your career to climate, and why your companies think there's a business case or investment case in climate. And to kick us off, I want to start with arguably the most popular man in the Indian climate scene right now, which is Mirik. Mirik, you can go from the CVC perspective to the foundation perspective to the venture perspective. You cover it all. So yeah, please start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Parikshit, and great to be part of this webinar in a ways or discussion. So I do wear multiple hats. So just for everyone's reference, I am part of the family at RT Industries, and RT is a large-scale chemical manufacturing company, and there we have our own decarbonization goals, which itself, since we use a large amount of fossil fuels uh, as our heat source, it's a challenging proposition in itself. So we do face some of the challenges of decarbonization firsthand, and when we look at the solutions, we know can this work or not work based on our economics and challenges. The other hat that I wear is obviously our family office, which is called Spectrum Impact, and where we deploy capital in climate across the world, but obviously predominantly in India. And we do philanthropic grants, we do equity investments, and we do debt capital. And the thing that we are realizing is the need for a problem solving approach rather than having a one size fits all strategy, because the challenges in climate are quite nuanced. And how do you go about it? I think the reason for me, rather than only looking from how do you increase the profitability of the company, and sort of to Parikshit's question of why the focus on climate, I think slowly around 2019 onwards, as I started to learn more and more about the complexity of the challenge, the scale of the challenge, and the fact that we come from a manufacturing background, I think there was a feeling that we can add more value to the discussion as compared to someone who doesn't have the sense of what it takes to manufacture or what it takes to scale up the solutions in a way. So I think there was an element that your ability to impact will be more direct, apart from the capital that you are deploying. So that's why we started in this journey. And I think right now, apart from investments, and maybe later I'll touch upon a few initiatives that I think Parikshit had also come to one of the initiatives. So we are looking at this as a very, what are the challenges and what is the solutions? And if the solutions don't exist, we don't mind getting ourselves on the ground and trying to build those solutions as well, and in a very, very collaborative manner. And that's why we have been able to now make a pretty strong network globally. I'll stop there, and obviously at the later stage, deep dive into some of those points.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And, to give a shout out to one of the initiatives, I attended the Brilliant Scale conference you put up, and I could see firsthand in Mumbai earlier this year in March that there's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all solution, and innovation really has to meet industry at the pain point, and yeah. So thanks for sharing that perspective. I want to next go and introduce Aakash from Peak Sustainability Ventures. The venture scene in India, there's not that many there weren't that many specialists in climate. There even now there's deep tech funds that may do semiconductors and some climate, right? There's growing number of deep tech funds, but their focus is not sustainability in a way that it has been for peak sustainability ventures for quite some time. So would love to hear your perspective on the venture case for sustainability and impact investments in India, and your role at the firm.
Yeah, happy to. No, thanks for that. And you're right. Look, I think we've been actively involved in this space for a number of years. We had done our first deal in 2012. We have two unicorns in the portfolio, Wari and VA Tech Wabag. And I've seen multiple cycles even within India's climate ecosystem, and that has obviously evolved quite significantly, much more so in recent years. So it's been an interesting sort of journey, I think, personally. And from the team and the GP's perspective, we have approached it from sort of always being interested in new emerging opportunities, and particularly for this, the opportunity to achieve very high commercial returns along with scalable climate impact. And what's very unique about this moment in time, at least for India, is that we really do believe that the next decade is the climate decade in VC. And in particular, when it comes to achieving some of the scale that perhaps wasn't achievable, or high capex solutions that was perhaps 5 to 7 years ago, the spectrum has really changed, and you're starting to see that innovation and talent come out, especially in India. And that's what's particularly exciting. For us, it's incredibly important, and I'm glad that you sort of I've noticed, at least, I guess, the nuances in terms of even India's VC ecosystem as it pertains to climate, in the sense that it is very, very important to have solely a focus on sustainability if you want to have long-term successful outcomes in your investments, because it's so complex, and each sector has so many nuances to it. And then there's the geography component on top of that. So energy, which forms around 50% of our portfolio, just within energy, you have sort of alternative energy sources, you have long duration energy storage, you have different battery chemistries, then you have slightly later solutions like hydrogen, potentially nuclear, and things like that. And that's just within energy. Now, we also look at food systems, water, and then a broader climate bucket, which includes green buildings, alternative materials, CCUS. And once you really start to break it down, it actually goes from being, okay, you're a pretty like focused fund, to it's actually quite broad in nature. And the overlay is the geography component. And how we really look at it is we do not have time to reinvent the wheel in India alone. So you have to take global technologies and scale them in India where appropriate, but they have to meet the needs of India, addressing India's pain points at India's price points. And that's firmly sort of what we believe as a firm. So that's kind of how we think about the firm and the fund and portfolio positioning.
Gotcha. Yeah. The old days of, tech transfer, here are the blueprints, and you have to do it our way. I think that model of tech transfer no longer applies. Yeah. Thanks, Aakash. And Ankit, coming to you, the Mahindra Group is huge. It's a diversified conglomerate. For people those that don't know, in the audience, like, it's a $50 billion market cap conglomerate, notably in auto, but also in other sectors like ag and much more. Them hiring and creating a position for a chief sustainability officer is a strong signal to the world that, in India is serious about sustainability, that corporate India is very serious about sustainability. How did you land this role, and tell us a bit more about your vision and Mahindra's rationale for this role?
Thanks. Thank you, Parikshit. An absolute pleasure to be here and share stage with all of you. I think, as you rightly pointed out, Mahindra is a large conglomerate in India with presence in almost 20 different industries, right? From manufacturing to service sector, financial services, IT services, logistics, real estate. So there's a lot of complexity in terms of the type of organizations. But when it comes to sustainability, the journey at the group actually started way back in 2008 itself. So this is not something that is new to the group. It's just that the space has evolved quite a bit, and especially in the last 3 to 4 years, I think there has been an internal need to integrate sustainability into the core business strategy. So earlier, sustainability was a lot to do with manufacturing operations, solving for the basics of wastewater and energy. But now it is increasingly about how do you integrate it in the core thinking of the business itself and create a portfolio of what I would call green products, green services, and in some cases, a green enabler. So products would be very simple things like a electric vehicle, green building or a net zero building, as we call it. Services are green logistics, the ability to get goods from one place to another using electric vehicles or low emission vehicles, but also multiple other things. It could be green energy and related areas. And then a green enabler is, I would say, green financing. So across the group and across each of the companies in the group, the idea is that how can we transfer the group into operating as planet positive businesses. And I'm happy to talk more about that. Coming to the other part of your question, which is, what made me come to this role. So exactly, I think sustainability is still a very evolving space in India. Historically, a lot of, I would say, CSR professionals, evolved into becoming sustainability professionals. But what we really need is a lot of strategy and business first people to start owning sustainability, to be able to help integrate the subject better into the conversation. So that is honestly how I ended up in this role as well. With a background from management consulting, the first problem statement that I was given when I joined or signed up for this role was, what would it even take for a corporate as diverse as Mahindra to be seen as a sustainability leader and move forward with real action in this direction. And then subsequently, over the last couple of years that I've been here, I think we have been trying answer this very question that unlike financial performance, which is often a bit easier to measure, sustainability performance is significantly harder to measure. And that is another thing that we spend a lot of time on, that it's a lot about influencing decisions not just within the company, but very much in the entire ecosystem, with government, with investors, with startups, with everyone, to move both the company but also the industry and the country along. So that's, I think, the two things that drive my role. And as I said, very excited to be here and get the conversation
Yeah.
going.
Thank you. There's something I hear in every answer is, a pain point and a price point. And, I really want to reinforce that climate tech, sustainable tech, it, as much as it is a sustainability story and planet positive story, it's also a productivity story. At the end of the day, everyone's looking for a cheaper, better, faster solution that is also green. And I hope that in this iteration of our Climate Tech Summit, we can dispel this myth that sustainability means poor performance, or people have to really make trade-offs when it comes to performance, or productivity when it comes to sustainability. So Michael, in the chat, had asked a very important question, and we'll unpack that uh, you know more over the course of the panel. And Michael writes about concerns over bureaucracy and corruption, and foreign startups navigating the ecosystem in India. So before we even get there, uh, there's the India of the cities, and then there's India of the hinterland. Things start looking very different in a tier 2 city, and start looking very different in a village. And Aakash, you brought up geography. Depending on where you are in the nation, a village could it could be this fabulous ecotourism village with the World Bank having so many projects, and the nonprofit sector very active. Or it could be a village where water, electricity still hasn't reached there. And many startups of late are being accused of inflating their addressable markets by really, making claims about 1.4 billion people, one rupee per 1.4 billion people a day is a huge market. And we all know that sometimes you have to spend 3 rupees to get 1 rupee out of a customer. So how do you guys think about um, getting sustainability, getting innovation and entrepreneurial uh, ecosystems beyond the cities? And maybe I'll start with you, Ankit, because Mahindra, you go to a small town and you'll see a Mahindra dealership, and your factories are all over the country as well.
No, absolutely, Parikshit, completely resonate with the thought that sustainability solutions have to be taken to every nook and corner of the country. But the way I look at it is that most sustainability solutions can be, let's say, bucketed into two dimensions. One is a time dimension that, what can be done in the short term, mid-term, long term. And then there's the second dimension that what is the role for large corporates versus mid-size companies versus, let's say, smaller companies. So the things that fall in the bucket of financial viability as well as environmentally beneficial, those are the things that we really need to scale at an accelerated pace when it comes to SMEs and MSMEs, which are generally present through the breadth and length of the country. And if you also look at any stats for any country, and especially the developing countries, you will realize that the economy of the country is actually not just dependent on the large listed entities. It's actually the unorganized sector or the small sector, which often constitutes between as much as 40 to 60% of the economy. So in case of India, and in our case, what we do at Mahindra, I think things like renewable energy, things like energy efficiency, things like process innovation in terms of, again, energy efficiency are absolute win-wins that needs to be scaled in the entire ecosystem. So to give you an example, we have been very actively working with a couple of global organizations, the likes of United Nations Global Compact, even our internal programs, etc., where we have been organizing both learning sessions and awareness building sessions to prove that sustainability is profitable. One of the points you made early, that unless and until you are able to get this message across that investing in sustainability has a very good ROI, especially in things like energy efficiency, for instance, where the ROI is often between 12 months to, let's say, 36 months. Renewable energy in India, given the cost is falling, it's about 40 to 60% cheaper in enough situations. So getting this message out, and not just the fact that it's better, but also how do you handhold them into being able to do this? I think those are the two things that we really focus on, both within Mahindra, and I think that's what we need to do as the Indian corporate ecosystem with all our supply chains. The same theory can be applied to, let's say, the logistics sector as well, where if I were to take the example of three-wheeler electric vehicles, they again have a total cost of ownership which is much better than a diesel vehicle, about 30 to 40% better than a diesel vehicle, and about 15 to 20% better than a CNG vehicle. So again, the information, awareness, and then the, let's say, requisite financing, etc., the enablers for the small individual buyer or the SMEs to adopt these solutions, that's the two things that's really required.
Yeah, I like how you frame it as a win-win between the hinterland and the city. And Aakash, from a venture investing perspective, how most of the pitches you take, I bet, are in the big cities, right? But your startups, as they scale, must go and scale not just in the big cities, right? So what has your experience been there?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's an important point to note that like a lot of people love this 1.4 billion number, which I think is fair, but also not entirely accurate. Like it's also something where many of these solutions, in fact, are not even targeting consumers. They're targeting corporates who are decarbonizing, right? And a key part of our whole sort of focus is this B2B element where you're bringing corporates in like a Mahindra or an Aarti or a JSW, Tata Steel, whoever it might be, to scale some of these like solutions in hard to decarbonize sectors. And so sometimes you're not even hitting that 1.4 billion, or you're just indirectly touching it. And so for us, it's very important that that company knows the TAM accurately, because if they don't, then it's a clear sign that already they are looking at this from kind of a superficial manner, or haven't really understood their go-to-market and actual customer base. And so I would say that's one thing, corporate versus consumer, and then within consumer, what part of the 1.4 billion are you talking about? I would say certainly, I mean, while they may be based in, I mean, urban or rural, usually they are looking at things from a national perspective and potentially a global perspective. And that honestly is what is interesting to us. One thing I try to tell, especially new people joining the fund as well, because it's a space where one can make a very, very large story from a personal perspective. Be like, look, I do a lot of composting, or I'm very sustainable personally. But as a venture investor, to actually invest in scalable companies that can move the needle, I mean, you theoretically you don't actually need to be sustainable at an individual level. You just really need to make smart investments that can have global or national scale. And so we've passed on investments that are very high impact, but only for at a village level or like multi-village level. But we have gone on done solutions that are like looking at moving the needle on national and global. And so that is also how one should think about it, how we think about it. And then I think last part is different solutions, right? So we have a solar rooftop financing company, energy inclusion and financial inclusion across tier 2 and tier 3 markets in India. But then you have a drink well that Unilever is taking them to Vietnam, Indonesia, Egypt, as well as sort of very large corporates in India. So I think it's really about the technology, the type of company, and then accordingly, things like TAM, go to market fall into place as well.
Very helpful. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that one person taking 7-minute showers is not going to save the planet. It really is a systems play for sure. And Mirik, I bet you travel all over the world, and in India as well. Your plant and distribution is all over India. And one of the things that Michael brought up in his question was bureaucracy, um, and navigating the ecosystem. Is that really true, that it's really slow bureaucratic process to scale up in India, to set up plants in India? There's corruption, and the ease of doing business factor uh, it is still very hard and limiting for a startup or for a big corporation like RT.
No, look, I think definitely in the ease of doing business, first of all, it is getting better. But I think the fact is there that there is some way to go in terms of the efficiencies that say we ideally desire. But let me flip the question in another way. Like
Mm-hmm.
I look at it as a challenge, right? Like if you want to solve for the world, then India is going to be a part of it. And India practically represents what you are going to face anywhere in the global south, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much, right? And there are ways to solve for it, right? Again, there are challenges, but like, for example, that is where, and that's what we did at the scale event, where it has to be a more partnership oriented approach rather than like we will do everything approach. If we do have a we will do everything approach, then there is an element which will be more challenging. But like if corporates like Mahindra or Aarti or people who have built businesses here, if they are your partners, then I think that is where things needs to evolve. Also, I would say uh, that perception also of India is changing, and I think I'll also use this forum to change it even more. That there are good, solid partners in India where the earlier fear of getting sort of cheated or things like that, I don't think that is there. I think the maturity of, and Parikshit, you were there, you saw the whole ecosystem. It's not only about the large corporates, even the small and medium enterprises looking for global business opportunities. There is an element of that partnering, the element of sophistication which has now come in, where people are looking at the long-term growth rather than short-term wins. So my sense is, look, it's not going to be as straightforward than as compared to maybe in the US or Europe, but it is definitely something which is well feasible to solve for. And that is why associations or collaborations, like maybe discussing with people who have done it on the ground, getting the right structures on board, that should take it to the next level. And there have been more than good enough examples of that happening. So it's not like it's not at all happening there. I think it's only increasing. And given the fact that it's a large emitter right now, and it's going to only increase the
Mm-hmm.
emission in the
Mm-hmm.
near term, I think it's incumbent upon every one of us to look at this as a positive challenge to solve for, rather than taking, okay, what do I do and do I do it somewhere else? So that will be my perspective at least.
Right. No, very, very helpful. And I think what I'm hearing there is that there's trust building that is needed. And that only happens if you go and visit the RT plant, and that's something, or a 10 scale, that, uh, in Mumbai. I'll actually drop a link uh, to scale later in the session so people are aware of it. And we have this saying at IndieBio that when it comes to climate, deep tech, capex heavy industries, you can't be that disruptor, that Silicon Valley move fast, break things, disruptor. You really have to be a diplomat of sorts. You have to work across the value chain. So that's definitely a very important point. And on that note, what do you think Silicon Valley misses when it comes to deep tech and sustainability and partnering with India and bringing startups to India? Akash, I'm sure you have a perspective there.
Yeah, certainly. And I think I guess it's just more to say what can be optimized as opposed to like just what's wrong with it. But I think even to your previous point, which actually touches on what is being missed, is many a times the starting premise is, look, okay, I want to build sort of something early stage tech and scalable. Now what should I look at? And in fact, our approach at the fund, and I think what a good approach is for this space in particular, is what is the problem and then how best does one address it, because many of these things are very complex, but also very tough to address solely with early stage tech. And even at the fund, while sort of the venture fund is the core, we do also try to set up certain larger operational businesses where early stage tech cannot be the sole solution. And we had discussed this in the past, but we had announced a large waste to energy project with the publicly listed water company called BA Tequabag, which is taking sewage waste and converting it to bio CNG for mobility and other applications. That in itself will be one of India's largest waste to energy projects and will require DFI capital and many other things. And while there is technology in there, it also won't deliver venture returns. And it is much more of an operational business that kind of needs to be done. Similar thing with sort of India's very, very large agri waste, right? And what do you do with that? Can you potentially use it for fuel or for like biochar or whatever you might have? Separately, we are working on something with IIT Mandi around solar panel recycling. We have 10 billion solar panels coming online. Can you do something useful with those valuable materials? I think point being that if you start with the premise of what are some of India's largest challenges from a sustainability perspective and how do you best address them, then automatically you can figure out in a much better way what the solution should look like. And many of these, especially those sort of in the hard to decarbonize sectors, they can be early stage tech. And we've looked at global technologies that are looking to sort of plug into cement and concrete or take flue gas and point source solutions and utilize the carbon from those flue gas streams. And so I think it's a very interesting question. I think last thing I would say regarding the Silicon Valley approach goes back to something I had said earlier, which is India itself has a lot of nuances. And I think a lot of people said this even with the whole consumer story and delivery and all that stuff, that look, you can't copy paste solutions. But even those solutions looked pretty similar. I mean, a Swiggy looks pretty similar to a delivery app in the US. Obviously, there's slight modifications, UI differences, things like that. In sustainability, the supply chain, the consumer, the corporate, the government, the entire infrastructure is quite different. And the solutions will just have to be different. So accordingly, those nuances have to be inbuilt and they have to really start from here. But at the same time, we do see global technology that can be applied in the right manner to address some of them.
Right. Yeah, I think the brute forcing your way and copy pasting into different parts of the world definitely won't work in India. Yeah. And by the way, I like the Uber India app a lot more than the Uber US app. It's far easier to get an Uber in Bangalore than in San Francisco. I have to say. Mirik, do you have would you like to add to that? You know, there's all this conventional wisdom around tech transfer, IP protection, but what we're hearing is that there's willingness on the ground. Come to India, look at how things are on the ground, and meet problems where they exist, and build trust, right? But I'm sure there's more you want to add. You've done deals both in Silicon Valley and in India at this point.
Yeah, I think let me just maybe touch upon what we try to do with scale, because that was an effort to do that. So the whole point of that is like, instead of looking only climate tech in isolation, where we are saying climate tech will solve the whole thing, which is not going to happen, right? You need a ecosystem approach, and that is why the idea that there was that can you have the Indian manufacturing ecosystem, which is very, very vibrant. So what effectively, what I would say, what Silicon Valley sometimes misses is the importance on the core technology becomes too high. And the fact that if you look at the cost of a plant, maybe 60-70% of the cost of the plant is a balance of the plant. But if you are so much focused on the core technology, you sometimes lose out of the fact that you really need to optimize the whole complete setup. And that is sort of linked to the fact that in India, I will never think about green premium even. Like, forget green premium, I will think about a green discount. And that's the mindset that for us, the importance of the cost is so high that we would want to really optimize so many things, even at a very early stage. So the approach will be, rather than sometimes that tends to happen that after you go to Series B, Series C, you will start the optimization journey. I think from an Indian perspective, and something that at least when I talk to even the globally funded startups that we have, we would want to have the optimization journey started pretty early on, because you see there's a wide range of optimization, and that is where the whole ecosystem approach comes in. And that is where I feel that the Indian manufacturing ecosystem has to play a big role, because that is where the cost reduction can happen. And then to your point of the IP issue and trust building, and that's why you don't want to go all in. I completely understand. And but there are levels to it, right? You can start with a good procurement. You can just keep the core IP in the US or in Europe, it's fine. But you have a strong procurement relationship, reduce the cost, then slowly build a potential joint venture or a tech transfer relationship. But the fear of the final step, as in it's like the journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first, right? So you need to start with those early engagements, and in 3-4 years, and that's where you can suddenly see a true benefit coming along. So that would be my perspective, that look at cost optimization first, and that's where the Indian ecosystem and the Indian role can be very, very high on that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you got to do it to really really know it. And yeah, I'll maybe, you know, I'll highlight Chemtech Scale in a post after this event. It really is a great event and forum. And I want to finish this theme of, you know, partnership and tech transfer and working with stakeholders in India with Ankit. From the Mahindra perspective, what is your strategy of partnering with startups that are, say, scaling up in the valley, in Silicon Valley, or in the US, in the clean tech scene, and want to then go and scale up in India? And now we have some cases, right? We have Lanza Tech and Indian Oil, their big deal. Alcem Energy did this big Series C with Tata for mobility. General Catalyst and Tata led the round. So it seems there's more and more happening with growth stage startups partnering with conglomerates in India. How do you look at that trend?
Sure. Parikshit, I'll answer that question, and I'll just summarize some of the things Aakash
Please.
and Mirik
Yeah,
said.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Go for it.
So, you know, for the external investor or the external startup looking at India, there are 2 or 3 key messages. So one, India sustainability is not so much a B2C market; it's a larger B2B market. That's one. You To Mirik's point, I think the willingness of the customer to pay a premium is just absolutely not there. The awareness itself is very low, which means that the larger sustainability market is largely B2B. Second thing, what solutions get adopted by the B2B segment are generally driven by either it makes environmental and business sense, or it's driven by regulation. So unless you have one of these two as the enablers, you won't really see a lot of uptick of the solution. The third part that I would stress is, and I think you touched upon this point, is that climate solutions will not scale at the way software solutions scale, and people will really have to take a slightly more long-term, patient view on this. The number of people who approach me with wanting to sell carbon credits or wanting to sell software is insanely high. Unfortunately, climate is a lot about physical materials and physical sciences, so you really will have startups which won't necessarily exponentially grow all the time, but the rate of success would be very high. That's the three messages that I just wanted to iterate. Now, to answer your question, I think absolutely when it comes to Mahindra, we generally take a approach of startups as procure, partner, invest. Now, on the procure bucket, there is a wide variety of problem statements that we have when it comes to sustainability, right from energy efficiency to renewables to materials to circular business models in construction, in manufacture of cars, in batteries, in recycling, panel recycling, battery recycling. So there's an entire bunch of 50 problem statements across the industry. So we are really looking for people to offer us commercially viable, sustainable solutions to tackle these problems. That's the procure bit. The partner bit is exactly as Mirik pointed out. There are lots of opportunities where we may not have the appetite to invest in the R&D or the technology formation, but we have the ability to really scale it and take it to the masses. And I'll give you a couple of successful examples. So, as part of the Mahindra Group, we have an agri business where there are 4 or 5 very small businesses, most of them enablers of sustainable agriculture. One of them is a partnership with a Norwegian company which does climate resilient varieties of seeds which use less water, more resilient to climate. We are trying to scale that up to about 30% of the market by 2030. Similarly, we have another partnership with another Scandinavian country again, is focused on potato seeds. Again, similar philosophy: reduce the uses of water, be more resilient. We had partnerships which led us to develop the entire drip irrigation market many years back. So there are multiple examples of, I would say, technology transfer or just helping a company scale up their solutions in India. That's the partner model. Then the third part that I would say is the invest model. Now, when it comes to the invest model, we are still not at a stage where we are investing as a venture capital. There are examples where we are investing when it's part of the core business portfolio, or it can be integrated as part of the core business portfolio. So more strategic investment and strategic acquisition. So that's the part that we are doing. I do believe personally that there is a wide space for us to do more in the early stage investments, but hopefully we'll get there. But I just feel that there's enough opportunity. It's about getting the right people to talk to each other and get these conversations going.
That's very helpful, very comprehensive. And one observation I will share is that there's the concentration of process engineers, of supply chain management that you get in the Indian manufacturing landscape is really dense, and you don't quite see that in the US or even in Europe. So that's how I would address this question, that there can be amazing R&D, translational science, and unique discoveries that can happen all over the world, but scaling them up, India is really uniquely positioned to have drop-ins or to partner and have very sophisticated tech transfer at this point. And Mirik, I just love the term a green discount. I think we need to talk about that a lot more. An integration that creates a green discount, which is the cheapest cost of yes, CO2, not the highest, is the right way of looking about it. By the way, I'm loving all the the questions in the chat. And Colin raises a very important question of coal, and how the Indian energy mix continues to be a coal dominant mix. And at the same time, India has done an incredible effort on renewable, and I bet it's already becoming cheaper and more scalable. But when we bring up coal, energy, uh, we have to address India's neighbor, China, um, which is arguably the leader in the world for solar and manufacturing of solar. Do you see any way that India will be able to compete with China on scaling up renewables, or similar to China, not be so reliant on coal over time? What do you think that energy transition looks like? Mirik, I see you want to go.
No, look, I think firstly, as a nation where our energy need per capita energy consumption is pretty low, and that's only going to increase. So I think this whole point around the reliance of coal and the price sensitivity, it is going to be there for some time for sure. I think the whole point that I think every one of us, at least in the panel, would agree that the shifting into renewables is happening at a fast pace. It is going to pick up more and more steam as the costs come down, as the storage, long duration storage comes down. And I have been talking to all major utilities in India, and everyone is looking at options, even like small modular reactors are being explored at different places and things like that. So India is very, very open, but we will, as a country, I don't think we will transition without a proper plan, right? It's as our energy needs are going to increase, we have to transition in a responsible way for the bigger population. So I think that is an important point just to highlight. Again, none of us are geopolitical experts here in that way, but I think that's still a point that needs to be put. And I think in terms of the story, there is a potential for India to really have this growth without emitting a lot of carbon at the end of the day. If you look at the holistic, when you say look back, when we are sitting in 2050, 2060, and when we look back, I think there will be a case to be made that India did the growth of economic prosperity while not adding a lot of carbon in that sense. But so I am pretty hopeful that we will transition in a responsible way, and that's how it will be. But that's why this importance of cost efficient solutions is so much, right? We need to really go out there and give the solutions to the country in a cost effective way, and I think the transition will even quicker as compared to what it is. But yeah, happy to hear everyone else.
Yeah, Ankit, go for it.
Parikshit, completely echo what Mirik said, but I also believe that India will be the first large economy which will actually have the abilities to show that, energy demand and GDP growth don't necessarily need to go hand in hand. And I'll take a Mahindra example to make this point and elaborate on it. So, over the last 5 years, Mahindra's revenue has gone up by about 40-45%, while our energy use has gone down by 20%. So, there's a negative correlation between energy demand and revenue, or rather volume growth, if you were to talk about it. And one of the bigger levers of this energy transition is, while everyone talks about shift to renewable energy, but we often ignore energy efficiency. So you can actually solve about 30-40% of the problem by just being more efficient in your manufacturing processes, in vehicle transportation sector, in the building sector. That is a untapped opportunity, and people don't talk about that enough. So I feel that is one area which is a win-win in many ways. It's just that the ecosystem needs to be enabled. In fact, I would again, Mirik did not talk about it, but he invested in this fan company that's known for BLDC fans. Those are absolute best in class examples of how you can be efficient at scale in how you use energy. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that even when it comes to the transfer to renewable energy, the cost problem is solved in India. We know today that renewable energy is significantly cheaper. The problem is the pace of deployment. For you to be able to get a plant on ground,
Mm.
what the, let's say, the regulatory process, as well as things related to, let's say, land acquisition, etc., all the process related complication makes it an extremely slow process. It takes you about between 2 to 3 years, and there's enough data out there to say that a huge amount of projects are currently been announced, but still
Right.
still far away from commissioning. So that is the part that we really need to address, that how do we deploy renewable energy solutions at pace. And there the problem of the discoms also come into play. So it's not just about deploying these solutions, but there's often a challenge at the state level when you go, that discoms are not always very happy to let a high paying corporate client go away and start producing their own renewable power. So
Right.
these are some regulatory challenges that really need to be addressed. That's one area. The second thing is that just in terms of measurement, the Indian government has its targets, and we often talk. And in fact, there was a press release yesterday that said that India reached 200 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. The problem is that we talk in terms of capacity of installation, which is a very wrong metric to look at this. We need to talk in terms of percentage of renewable energy by generation. And that's what makes the picture a bit more clear, because 1 gigawatt of coal is not equal to 1 gigawatt of solar, and that is something that not everyone understands very easily. So I think just the measure or the metric that we use, changing that itself can make a big difference in perception and action. And second is the regulatory push on the renewable energy side, and I think energy efficiency as the third lever. These three things together can really, make a big difference.
Oh man, that's such a great answer. Thank you, Ankit. It's not the threat of cheap. It's not cheap Chinese solar that will do it. It's more about efficiency. It's yeah, that's a great way of looking at this. And you know something you bring up, and for the audience, Discom is a distribution company. It's a very in the Indian context, that's what it means. So I appreciate this answer. It's given me a lot to chew on. And we're
Could I
yeah,
just add one
yeah, please
component
go for it.
to, because I think it's a really important point when people think about India's grid and what fuels it, because I think sometimes people miss then the breakup of it and renewables as an inherent issue with intermittency. And what everyone is sort of working on is round the clock energy. And can you do that through long duration energy storage, and what types of battery solutions are actually required? And we haven't got to that place yet where we can solve for that, but that is what a key part of now using this renewable capacity. But I think, while I do agree that capacity may not be the best metric, it also is one metric to show where India stands. And Wari Energies, for instance, has built the largest solar capacity outside of China in a single location. And so that shows the scale and where India is at. And I think it also is a good positive macro sign of where we can get to. And one other thing I'd like to highlight, because fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the sustainability funding to date has gone into EVs. And I think while it's a good way to generate sort of consumer interest and belief in sort of sustainability, if you link it back to the grid, and this is kind of something we had done around 2 years ago and have sort of seen, is that, look, in fact, many of these EVs, if the grid is primarily coal, you're basically powering that electricity with coal. Then when you take into account the embodied carbon associated with actually building a car, really, when you think of the net end result of many EVs on the road, it's not as beneficial as people might think, particularly in a place like India, where you need to think about these hard to abate sort of sectors. So there's multiple nuances to it, like everything, but it's really important to know the fuel sources and how we can get to where we want to be.
Absolutely. And India has an integrated national grid, which not a lot of countries in the world have. So it is in a position to, once you generate, you can quickly integrate. And I agree with Ankit that the distribution company part is a very, transmission distribution is an important part. But yeah, Colin, I hope we answered your question there. y- that was a very important question about moving away from coal. And my wrapping up this nugget of discussion, I think India, out of all places in the world, knows that for the country to keep growing, we can't rely on coal. So the transition is a necessity. It's really not a good to have. So I am hopeful there. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of great questions coming up in the chat around, partnerships and getting stuff going on the ground. And one of the things that came up is risk. And I'm a venture investor. Aakash is a venture investor, and we're in the business of taking risk. But something that I hear a lot about in the Indian context is the fear of failure. People do not like failing, and sometimes there can be a stigma around failure as well. Do you guys think that's a fair statement on my part to make? Do people fear failure, and are people not taking enough risk in the Indian context just because we don't like to take risks that way? Akash, I want you to start.
Sure. I would actually say one thing we've heard a lot, particularly from investors in the US, is that it's a cheaper cost of failure in India, which is why they're so excited about the market. And that is something that has sort of been repeated and is actually sort of at least how they view the India market and its potential relatively, that your cost of manufacturing, cost of building a team, things like that, it's easier to prove commercial success at least. I would say, I mean, see, Indian culture, Indian society has certain stigmas and just things in the culture. I don't think any culture sort of promotes failure, but there's certainly cultures that are perhaps a little more open to it or okay with it. At the same time, if 10 years we were having this discussion, like 10 years ago, I would say definitely. Now, like, it's been sort of trailblazed by Bangalore, the venture ecosystem, tech, SaaS, such that now, I mean, obviously everyone talks about like memes on LinkedIn talking mainly about failure and, okay, I failed at my first 5 startups, stuff like that. But I do think in India that mentality has changed. People are much more open to taking that risk and striking out on a limb and actually sometimes proving to be successful. Failure, especially at a sort of a fund level or how we think about it, look, it's something that comes part and parcel with sort of risk adjusted returns, and you go further down the spectrum, then your chance of failure will be less. But then failure means not doing a great deal, doing an okay deal. And so I really think it's about where you are in the venture ecosystem. And Ankit, for instance, will probably be using mainly technologies that are at that point of commercialization, whereas Mirik, with sort of grants as well as through other means, will be able to take those very, very early stage calls. As a fund, we also have LPs and we have a certain criteria. So I really think it's about where you play, and accordingly, you're okay with it from that portfolio or fund perspective.
Thank you. That's a hopeful message. And I want to go over to Mirik because the stakes are so much higher for, say, your family office or at the corporation level, right? But somehow you've embraced this new frontier for spectrum impact, and you're reinventing how family offices and corporations look at risk and take bold risks. How do you look at failure while taking risks? Does that scare you, or is that a feature, not a bug in your mind?
I think in our approach, I think I would say family offices actually have a much bigger responsibility because your ability to fail is much higher, right? At the end of the day, like it's sort of non-judgmental capital that you have. It's your own judgment at the end of the day. And I think if you change the psychology of, say, I want to have certain millions of dollars in my bank account to I want to create X amount of impact. That's like a small but very powerful switch. If you can just make that, then that will happen. And then you suddenly look at failures as learning. Like one of the things that I'll maybe say is what we have embraced is it's fine that you fail, but don't do analysis paralysis. Like don't overanalyze things because you are investing or deploying capital so early that you are obviously going to have cases where it won't work out and the thesis will evolve, right? 2 years ago, what I would have thought about hydrogen, now it's changed. 2 years later, it may change again. So I think it's fine. I think you need to, given that climate is a time sensitive issue, that also adds to the layer. You cannot like just, my view is you cannot overthink about a thesis too long also. Like you need to take a call. And
Right.
that's what we have been able to do. As a corporation, obviously, things are a bit different now. When I look at put my RT Industries hat on, we have to be more conservative, rightfully so, right? We have bigger
That's
responsibilities and you have
Mhm.
to I mean, having said that, one thing that we do as a corporation, although not a big part, but a certain part of our R&D or certain part of our initiatives, we have that approach of trying to incorporate the most cutting edge things out there. But we do it obviously in a more conservative manner, taking into account the bigger things and scrutinizing the opportunity much, much more. From a family office perspective, we are a bit more aggressive, and I think we value time a bit more, and that's the highlight that I'll maybe say
Yeah.
that family office need to do that. Otherwise, sometimes it's difficult to kickstart a lot of things because um, it's a different type of capital that you have at a family office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something I admire is that there's this. You have the ability to do both catalytic investments as well as slow and risk adjusted investments. So that's a yeah, that's a good answer. And Ankit, from your side, how do you think of this risk, right? Especially trying out uh, new technological approaches, or maybe even new market creation, where the procurement or the tech specs aren't really developed for a corporation to partner with. There's a little bit of an unknown when it comes to how the product will be integrated into your workflows.
Sure, Parikshit, I'll answer that question in actually two parts. The first
Please,
part,
yeah.
it's you know, from a founder's perspective, to your earlier question that what's the risk, or why is India more skeptic when it comes to failure? So India has generally been a capital starved market, which means that when you lay your hands on any capital as a founder, you generally have a lot more pressure. So it's more of a cultural thing, but driven by the fact that it's a generally capital starved market. But I would also add that to what Aakash said, that the cost of failure, or the cost of building anything, I wouldn't say failure necessarily, the cost of building anything in India is much cheaper. It's just that what may be seen as failure in India, because certain you don't find buyers in India, some of these solutions can actually be sold globally. So if I were to give one advice to founders, is build in India for the world. And I've seen both large scale companies. So there's this very famous company, Carbon Clean. The founders, started way back in 2008, probably spent 6 to 8 years in India, could not do much, shifted base to London. It's close to $1 billion company now. And now coming back to India and selling solutions. There's another founder that I've had the opportunity to mentor. He's building his solution in India, but he's sitting in Dubai and selling it to the world. He gets high quality resources at low cost in India. He's able to pilot the solution with many companies in India, including one of the Mahindra Group companies. Unfortunately, we don't pay them enough, and I'll be very candid in admitting them. But the same solution at scale by building in India has a much higher revenue potential in a global market. So that's the approach that I would say, that the lens, build in India for the world in a capital starved market. Now, from a corporation's perspective, I would again say that there has been historically a lot of appetite to enter early in the market. From Mahindra's perspective, we actually entered the EV space way back in 2011.
Wow.
There was something called the Reva. It did not pick off. It died. But now we are sort of going again, in a much bigger way. Another more recent example that I'll take is the end of life vehicle recycling market. That market in India is still at a very nascent stage. And again, to the point Aakash made, that we have a billion solar panels, we similarly have, probably 30 to 50 million end of life vehicles already waiting out there to be recycled. But due to a variety of reasons, that market has not taken off yet. But Mahindra did investment in that sector about 5 years back. We were the first company and are still the largest company. In absolute terms, it's a very small business, but in terms of size, it's already 40 50 locations, 7 8 plants, etc. We are waiting for the market and the regulation to mature, to be able to all the capacity that has been built up. So I think there is willingness if there is the right rationale. It's just that when it comes to corporates, I think two enabling factors are required. One is, I think, both awareness and understanding, depth of understanding, I would say, with the board members, with the promoters. That's one area. And the second thing that I would say is the investor ecosystem, especially the I would say long term patient capital, the I would say in the institutional investors that are coming in some of our businesses, as well as the generally foreign institutional investors, their ability to influence these kind of decisions is really important. So I think those are the two enabling factors that really move the needle in the Indian corporate ecosystem. So in Mirik's case, I think he's the driver, but then there are 50 other Indian corporates that can really do a much better job if these two enabling factors, improve in the economy.
Very helpful. Thank you. All right. So we're almost at time. And yeah, in the last 3 minutes, I guess I want each one of you to, I want to highlight or pick your brain on, or I guess hear from you what's top of mind for you these days. What are you guys excited about? And we can keep this quick and popcorn. Aakash, what's really either really exciting you or keeping you up at night these days?
Luckily, no portfolio company is keeping me up at night, but we are very excited about certain things. So very quickly, CCU, we're focused on the utilization part, not the storage part. Cooling, I think a lot of people are talking about cooling, but very, very important, particularly for India. Long duration energy storage, been looking at the space for 2.5 years, but still looking to find something. And lastly, green buildings. It's such an important space. And if you can influence that, it's a big, big thing.
Great. Ankit, how about you?
So what makes me excited is the fact that everyone's talking about climate. All industries, all kinds of stakeholders, investors, corporate executives, the common man. So that is something that's heartening, and I see that the conversations is only increasing with time. That's one. What scares me a little bit is the fact that we are not investing enough in adaptation, especially as a highly vulnerable country, both in terms of food security, physical disasters, etc. I think we are not investing enough in adaptation, and adaptation is also much harder for it to be commercially viable. So that is one thing that I would say is more concerning in my mind.
Yeah, that is very important indeed. How about you, Mirik?
So I think one thing that I am focused on currently is setting up this translational research center to close the industry academia gap in India. We did set up one around membranes, which again is very relevant for climate in multiple ways. But the idea is to maybe set 30 or 40 more such centers, and that's a large collaborative effort that I am sort of undertaking now. And the second thing is, I think, baseload green energy. I think not solar, not wind, no intermittency. And what are the other baseload clean energy sources, whether it's deep geothermal, whether this inline hydro and other things. So that's some of the things is an area that I am currently working on a few projects. So that's
that's yeah, great insight. Yeah, man, I appreciate all these answers. I've had a lot of fun. We're at time, and this panel is making me realize that climate and sustainability are not hype investments. You guys have green discounts to realize, and real impact to make, and it's a business case for a vibrant economy. So thank you all. Over to you, Ned.
Thank you, Parikshit. That was a brilliant session. And thank you, Ankit, Mirik, and Aakash. Great work. My favorite phrase from the whole session was build an India for the world. And I'm sure that's what's going to happen in the future. So thanks again for joining us. And for everyone listening, we will make this session next week available on YouTube. And I hope there's a lot here for all of us to study.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Parikshit, Ned.
Bye.